All right, so that's the moving average. And the beauty of moving average is that now we look at the red line, it's very clear to us that the sales is increasing in early years, decreasing for a couple of years, then suddenly going up dramatically. And afterwards, sales has been declining ever since, right? We see that pattern. So apparently, for the analysis, we need to find out what's going on with the time series data. What's going on with the series revenue? Why they have this big jump, and how come after the jump they did even worse? Revenue is declining, and if you compare the last revenue and the first revenue, they after all the years changes, they almost reverted to the original 1995 sales level. What's going on there, right? So next thing we want to examine is the linear trend, which is the secular trend, as I mentioned. But I want to show you that we do this by using a simple linear regression. And as I mentioned, the left side dependent variable will be the sales, and the right-hand side X, the independent variable, will be time, okay? But we're gonna use T equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, things like that. So theoretically speaking, when we want to add the linear trend or when we want to estimate the simple linear regression, we use sales as the dependent variable, and we're gonna call the time to be 1, 2, 3, 4 instead of the original year number. For our case here, there's a shortcut. That is, I will not ask you to really come up with the regression analysis that you learned in chapter 23, okay? What the shortcut we have is, remember, when we try to add the moving average trend line, at the beginning, when we hit at trend line, we actually got a straight line. That is actually the linear trend. Okay, so that's the shortcut. And let me switch over to Excel to show you this quickly. All right, so here we're back with the Excel. Now, if I want to add a trend, now actually it is preferred that you start with a new slide instead of adding a trend here, just to avoid messing up the graph. So I'm gonna delete the trend, the moving average trend. Then I'm gonna add my straight line, linear trend. So add trend line, click add trend line. Then apparently you've got this straight line, although going upward there. And in addition, since we're not running the simple linear regression, use the traditional method in Excel, that is highlight things. And notice we didn't even code the time from 1, 2, 3 all the way to the end. Since we're doing a shortcut, we still want to know the regression equation. So what you can choose is at the bottom you see display equation on chart, display R-squared value on chart. With these two things, we got pretty much the very basic analysis of simple linear regression. So we can also, if you want, change the line color to red, because that will make the line outstanding. Okay, close. So there we have, instead of the moving average, we have the linear trend. And the linear trend is upward sloping, that's number one. However, we shouldn't interpret this upward sloping as good news necessarily, because it's the trend over all the years, but we do observe recently the trend is going down. So this simple linear trend is actually kind of not reflecting what was really going on. So we need to look into it very carefully. All right, that's how you add linear trend to time series data. So in comparison, when we look at the linear trend and the original time series plot, we notice something going on in the middle. That is, the sales is declining over years and then suddenly going up. So we call that structural break. We usually call that structural break because the pattern is different. It's switching now, right? It's a big gap, right? And it will be our focus to find out what's going on, why there's a structural break. So let me jump a little bit, then we'll come back, okay? And exploring what's going on during the structural break, I will need to do some research, right? So by searching online, what I found out is in 2015, Kmart and Sears decided to merge. I don't know how many of you noticed that news or remember that. I do remember that clearly because around that period, both Kmart and Sears are not doing well, actually. And you will be kind of surprised to learn, oh, these two are merging? And what would you expect out of that, right? Apparently, they didn't do well after the merge. And the big jump is because Sears is merged with Kmart, so their sales suddenly increased because now it's two companies together. But then after that, the company experienced consistent quarters of decline ever since, right? So why is that? And there are not a lot of analysis on the internet trying to kind of point out what's going on, why declining, and things. So I've got a few things here, and one major argument is that the Sears CEO is penny pinching, right? His management style is penny pinching. One thing the analyst conducted is to compare the capital expenditure on store improvement. After all, for those retailers, store environment is very important for us customers, right? We would like to shop in a bright, clean environment instead of a dirty and dark environment, right? And they found out that for Sears, the expenditure on store improvement is only 1% of sales. And compare that to Macy's, which is 2.5%, and usually Sears sometimes is compared to Macy's. Macy's is more than double their amount, and Walmart is 8.8%. Well, Walmart usually is considered to be relatively a low-end supermarket in comparison to Target, and the shopping environment is not as nice as Target. However, Walmart is still spending 8.8% of sales, right? And the other thing they point out is that the CEO decided to hire an IBM veteran with no retail experience to run Sears and Kmart. Yes, a veteran from IBM can be a very good person or very skilled, but in his own field, he has no experience running retail. IBM is, after all, different from retail companies. IBM is more tech company, right? So if there's no experience, then you are running a risk. How could that person be able to manage retail very successfully? There's always a risk. And so these are the main reasons for Sears to be performing like what was shown in the time series data. And I've got a source here just to cite where I got them. Okay, so for your data analysis project, this is what was required for the first part, time series analysis. Okay, so starting from the beginning, right back here, here. Starting from the very beginning, I expect you to plot your revenue data. Okay, you can combine the plot with moving average together. You can show this picture instead of the one without the trend line. You can show the trend line and the original plot together. Okay, briefly talk about what's what do you have here, okay? And then next, I want you to show this picture, that is the original plot with the trend line, and explain what you are showing here, okay? So when you give your presentation, apparently you're gonna show the picture itself, and don't put words on this slide, okay? When you show a picture, you don't put long paragraphs or even phrases to explain what's going on. You show the picture itself, you explain in your presentation, you talk about it, okay? And when you show the picture, when you talk about it, make sure you first explain what is shown here, what you're trying to show here, okay? Explain, I have the original plot of the revenue, and then a linear trend is added, things like that. So explain to your audience as if they've never seen this picture before. Don't take it for granted that your audience is familiar with what you have here, okay? Then after that, okay, just on this page, you can start explaining if there's any structural break, okay, and also talk about the trend, the overall trend of the sales. Do you expect that such trend welcome? Is such trend unusual? If there's anything unusual, if there's any structural break, you definitely need to explain. That's the part for you to do research online, okay? You definitely need to explain what's going on. What management decision lead to such breaks? What management decision lead to such trend? That's the part you need to explain, okay? You can either explain over that picture, or you can do what I have here, list them and talk about it, okay? I know some of you are looking at this PowerPoint slide may have the question is, oh yeah, so for my past presentations, you told me not to put long sentences, a lot of content on one PowerPoint slide, okay? Why you are putting so much, okay? All right, so I want to take this opportunity to explain what's going on. It's slightly from your presentation. What I'm doing here is I'm trying to give a lecture, and the more I put on the PowerPoint slides, the more you can review when you study for your exams, when you review the materials. So that's the big difference. With my PowerPoint slide, I do want it to be detailed enough so that you can use it for your review, all right? Now, when you give a presentation, especially in business, you give the presentation to the management team. Most likely, they listen to your presentation. They get the information from your presentation, okay? And they don't expect you to put a lot of content on the PowerPoint slide. They expect you to present it. They expect you to talk about it. So that's the difference. So for you, I wouldn't expect you to put such a PowerPoint slide with so much details. I would like you to use bullet point as what I have here, but just put a short sentence or just a few phrases. The purpose of PowerPoint is really to give the audience a very rough idea about what you're going to talk about next. It's the main point. It's not the full content at all. All right. So I also want to take this opportunity to remind you that when you give your presentation, again, pay attention to what you say versus what you have on the PowerPoint slide. Don't just say what you have there. And again, don't put everything you want to say on the PowerPoint slide. Even if you add a few transition sentences, even if you try to rephrase this long sentence a little bit, it's still considered to be reading out the PowerPoint. Okay, you want to give the very core idea of what you want to say in the bullet point, and then explain it in more details. Okay, so that's what's expected for the first part of data analysis project. I want to go back to the slide we skipped and talk about this just briefly. So I actually mentioned this at the beginning, that is, when you look at a time series, its four components are mixed together. So there are times you want to get rid of certain component to understand what's going on. Something that we usually do is in time series analysis is to do seasonal adjust and detrend data. This is not available in Excel, and therefore I won't ask you to do this, but I want to show you this cool tool that allows you to analyze time series. And if your focus is not about season, right? You do want to adjust the data to get rid of the seasonality. And if your focus is not on the trend, okay, if you want to look at the irregular, for example, if you want to know whether some exogenous shock affected the time series data, then you also want to detrend the data. So using other software like Minitab or SPSS, we can do seasonal adjusted and detrended data. I've done this for years. So the first plot is the original data, okay? And then if I want to get rid of the trend, I can do the detrended data, okay? It's not totally detrended, but to a certain extent, okay? And the next one is I can get rid of the get rid of the seasonality. So apparently, if you look at the third plot here, you won't see that clear pattern over seasons. So this is called seasonal adjusted. And finally, you can do seasonal adjusted and detrended data if your focus is really on exogenous shock, especially for our case with this seasonal adjusted and detrended data. This big gap is very apparent, very clear now, right? If you look at this big gap in comparison to that big gap, yes, I would agree if you argue with me and say, hey, I can still see there's a big gap here. I agree. You can observe this gap in the original plot versus the last plot. However, think about it. If there's a situation that the gap is not so apparent and you are suspicious there might be, then
adjusting for seasonality and trend will help us to better identify if there's any structural break. Right, so that's all I have for this chapter. Talk to you next time.